Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Chit Chatting with Kate Carr. We're going down the rabbit hole of r/no sleep. This babysitting gig has some strange rules to follow. I had been sitting at home, flipping through a magazine and half watching TV, when my phone rang. The woman on the other end sounded frantic, almost too eager to secure a sitter for the night. Her voice, tight with urgency, made me hesitant at first, but the pay she offered was hard to ignore. "Please," she had said, "I just need someone reliable, just for tonight." I'd agree, but as soon as I hung up the phone, a strange feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was a babysitting job, nothing more. So why did I feel so uneasy? The house stood at the end of a long, winding driveway, hidden among tall, dark trees. It wasn't the kind of house you would expect to feel unsettling at first glance. It was modern, clean, and neatly kept. But something about the place felt wrong, even before I stepped inside. The windows were dark and reflective, catching the last fading light of the evening sky. I felt a strange heaviness as I stood outside, staring up at the house. I knocked, and within moments, Mrs. Winters opened the door. She was a tall, thin blonde with her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Her dress, a soft blue, was elegant, but a little too formal for a quiet evening at home. Her face, a mask of politeness, with just a hint of something unreadable behind her eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside for me to let in. "I know it's last minute." The house was warm, but not in a welcoming way. The air felt stifling. Heavy. The scent of lavender lingered, but it couldn't mask something else underneath. Something faint, like an old wood or damp air. "No problem," I replied, forcing a smile as I stepped inside. Mrs. Winters gestured towards the staircase, but then turned to me, her voice lowering. "Before you go upstairs, there are a few important rules that you need to follow." She handed me a piece of paper, the edges worn, like it had been folded and unfolded so many times. The rules were written in neat, slanted handwriting. 1. Do not open the window in Daniel's room. 2. If you hear knocking at the door, do not answer it. 3. Keep the closet door in Daniel's room closed at all times. 4. Do not go into the basement for any reason. The list of rules made my stomach twist a little bit. "These are rather specific," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mrs. Winters' eyes flickered to the staircase again before she looked back at me. "Just follow the rules and you'll be fine." She didn't wait for me to ask anything. She grabbed her coat from a nearby chair, gave me a tight smile, and hurried out the door. The clicking of the door shutting echoed louder than it should have. For a moment, I stood in the foyer, staring down at the list in my hand. The rules felt odd. No, they felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on why. Taking a deep breath, I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket before heading upstairs. Daniel's room was at the end of a long, dim hallway. The door was slightly open, and the light from inside spilled in a thin line across the floor. I knocked softly, pushing the door open a little more. Daniel sat on the edge of his bed, his dark hair falling into his eyes. He didn't look up when I entered. "Hi, Daniel," I said, gently stepping inside. He didn't respond, just sat there, staring at the wall across from him, his small hands clutched on the edge of his bed, his knuckles pale. The room itself was neat, but something about it felt off. The air was colder than the rest of the house, and there was a strange stillness to everything, like the room had just been frozen in time. I glanced down at the closet door. It was closed, just as the rule instructed. For some reason, the sight of it sent a chill down my spine. "Do you want to play a game or read before bed?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Daniel shook his head slowly, still not looking at me. "You can't open the window." The bluntness of his words startled me. "I know, I won't open it. She doesn't like it when it's closed," he added quietly, almost to himself. I frowned, my heart beating a little faster. Who doesn't like it? Daniel's grip on the bed tightened, but he didn't answer. His eyes fluttered briefly toward the door, then back to the window. The silence in the room grew heavier. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock from somewhere downstairs, the only sound in the house. I sat down on the chair near his bed, trying to shake the strange sense of dread settling over me. "Are you okay?" I asked, unsure of what else to say. Daniel finally looked at me, his dark eyes wide and unnervingly calm. "She comes when it's dark." I blinked, unsure if I had heard him correctly. "Who comes?" He didn't answer, just turned back towards the window. The air felt colder now, almost suffocating. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, but the glass was empty, reflecting only the dim light from inside the room. Minutes passed, the quiet stretching unnaturally. I found myself staring at the closet door again, the simple instruction on the list playing over and over again in my mind. Keep it closed. But why? What could possibly be in a child's closet that would require such a rule? Without warning, Daniel crossed the room and stood in front of the window, his face inches from the glass. My heart skipped a beat as I stood up, remembering the first rule. Do not open the window in Daniel's room. "Daniel?" I called softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "Please step away from the window." He didn't respond right away. My pulse quickened as I took a step closer, my mind racing with the rule. Why wasn't I allowed to open the window? What would happen if I did? "Daniel, you need to stay away from the window," I said more firmly this time. Slowly, Daniel turns to face me, his eyes more wide, but there was something off about his expression. He stared at me for a long moment, then shrugged and walked out of the room without a word. He was already in the hallway, his small figure disappearing around the corner. I hurried after him, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what I expected him to do, but the house felt different now, like it was watching us. As I followed Daniel down the stairs, the floor creaked underfoot and the air grew colder. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, Daniel was standing in the foyer, staring at the front door. His hands were clenched at his side, his head tilted slightly as if he was listening for something. "Hey, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice trembling. "She knocks sometimes," he said quietly, his eyes fixed on the door. "But you can't open that. You know that, right?" I swallowed hard, trying to calm the raising panic in my chest. "Yes, I know. Come back upstairs, okay?" "Oh my gosh, no. You creepy child. I'm so sorry. We're leaving the kid." "No, we're not. That's a joke. That's a joke. But, we're getting Daniel and we're leaving. We're gonna go to Burger King or something. Whatever's open at this time of night, because you're freaking me out, kid, and I need to get outside of this house." That wasn't one of the rules. I couldn't take Daniel to Burger King overnight, so we're not breaking any rules for Mrs. Winters, so we're just trying to get away from whatever demon is haunting your house. He ignored me, taking a step closer to the door. My pulse quickened. I took a deep breath and moved towards him, reaching out to take his hand. But before I could grab him, he spun around and darted towards the living room, moving faster than I expected. I followed him into the living room, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Daniel stood in the center of the room, staring at the fireplace. The embers from a fire long since extinguished flickered faintly, casting strange shadows on the wall. He moved towards the far corner of the room, where a small door was built into the wall. My heart sank as I realized what it was: the basement door. He just stared at me for a moment, then pulled away from my grasp and walked back towards the stairs. My legs felt weak as I stood there, staring at the basement door. When I caught up to him, he was already halfway up the stairs, his small hands trailing along the banister. He moved quietly, as if the house itself was watching him, waiting for something. Back upstairs, Daniel walked into his room without a word and sat down in his bed, his eyes once again drawn to the closet. The doors were still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving behind it. There was a faint, almost... I don't know how to say that word. What's this word? How do I say this word?
Imperceptible.
Imperceptible. Almost imperceptible noise coming from it. Actually, I could have worked that through if I just took 2 seconds to work it through, but I've never seen that word before. Anyway, almost imperceptible noise coming from it, like the soft scrape of nails against the wood. I forced myself to stay calm, my eyes flicking to the window. It was shut tight, the curtains still. "Daniel," "What's inside the closet?" I asked, my voice serious. "She is," Daniel whispered. The third rule said to keep the closet door in Daniel's room closed at all times. But I felt a strong, unnatural pull to the doors. I had to see what was inside. My hands were shaking as I moved toward the closet door, and just as I reached it, a faint knock echoed throughout the house. My heart stopped. I looked at Daniel, who was now staring at the door with an expression that sent chills down my spine. The knock echoed throughout the house, soft at first, but unmistakable. It wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that made my stomach twist. I froze, remembering the second rule. If you hear knocking at the door, do not answer it. Without warning, Daniel stood up and walked towards the door. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he were drawn to the sound. My heart pounded in my chest. I rushed towards him, grabbing his arm before he could reach the handle. "We can't open it," I repeated, my voice tight with fear. He turned to look back at me, his dark eyes wide and unblinking. "She needs me." His words made my skin crawl. I pulled him away from the door, leading him back to the bed, but his gaze never left the door. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as though the house itself were holding its breath. I looked at Daniel, hoping he would say something, anything, to explain what was happening. But instead, he started running towards the living room, his steps quick and purposeful. "Daniel, wait!" I called, hurrying after him. I caught up to him just as he stopped in front of the basement door. The boy didn't hesitate. His small fingers wrapped around the door handle, and before I could stop him, he pulled it open. A gust of cold air rushed up from the dark staircase below, and an unsettling shiver rippled through my body. "Daniel, we can't go down there," I said, my voice shaking, but the child wasn't listening. His eyes were wide and glassy, as though something had taken a hold of him, pulling him into the darkness below. Without a word, he stepped down into the first creaky stair, his small frame swallowed by the shadows. I hesitated for a split second before rushing after him. I couldn't leave him down there all alone, no matter what the rule said. Each step I took, I felt heavier than the last. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and the smell of the damp earth and something old and decaying filled the space. It clung to my skin, thick, like a fog that made it hard to breathe. At the bottom of the stairs, Daniel stood perfectly still. His gaze was fixated on a small dust-covered table in the corner of the room. The single light bulb overhead flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows that danced across the walls. Everything felt wrong, like the basement had been waiting for us all along. I stepped closer, trying to steady my breathing. Daniel walked over to the table, his small hands reaching for something resting there. When he lifted it, I saw that it was an old photograph in a cracked, weathered frame. His fingers trembled slightly as he stared down this image. I moved closer, and when I saw what was in the picture, my heart skipped a beat. It was a photo of two women. One I immediately recognized as Mrs. Winters, his mother. The other woman looked almost identical to her, but she was younger, and there was something unsettling about the way she stood. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too focused on Daniel, who was a toddler in this photo, cradling in her arms. "That used to be my Aunt Vivian," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible. "She died in a car accident. Mom survived." "She was always around me," he continued, his voice growing quieter, as though the memories were pulling him deeper into a trance. "It was like having two mothers. She tried to be nice, spending all of her time with us, but my mother didn't like it too much. She didn't like how much time she spent with me." A chill crawled up my spine as the flickering light dimmed even further. The basement felt darker, the air heavier. I took the photo from Daniel's trembling hands, placing it back on the table, but something made me turn toward the far corner of the basement. There, where the light barely touched, I saw something shift in the shadows. Then, a cold, raspy voice, full of bitterness, cut through the silence. "She never deserved you." The sound made my blood run cold. I turned slowly, my heart pounding as the shadows in the corner began to twist and writhe. Again, a word I don't know. Well, what does this mean?
Writhe.
Writhe. began to twist and writhe, forming a shape, a figure. It moved slowly, as if it had been waiting there all along. Hanging from the wall, half hidden in the darkness, was the twisted figure of a woman. Her limbs were too long, unnaturally thin. Her body contoured in a way that made my stomach turn. Her face was pale, sunken, and her eyes, black pits of rage and envy, were locked onto Daniel. "I've waited long enough," the voice hissed, echoing throughout the room like a venomous whisper. Daniel's body stiffened beside me, his breath shallow and shaky. I could feel the air around us growing colder, and my skin prickled with fear. The figure detached itself from the wall with a sickening crack, her long spider-like limbs stretching as she moved closer, her smile twisting into something cruel and hateful. "It's time to come with me, Daniel," she hissed again, her low voice filled with malevolent intent. Before I could react, Daniel's body began to rise off the floor, his feet lifting from the cold concrete as though an invisible hand had pulled him upward. His eyes rolled back into his head, his arms dangling lifelessly at his sides, and the spirit moved towards him, her twisted form looming over him. I screamed, rushing toward Daniel, but the moment I reached for him, a force slammed me, sending me staggering backwards. The cold pressed in on me from all sides. I could hear her laughter. It was a deep, menacing, and filled with satisfaction. Daniel's body convulsed in mid-air, his eyes now completely white as the spirit tried to take over him. Her long, twisted arms reached for him, her bony fingers inches from his skin. Desperation clawed at me as I searched the room for anything, something that could stop her. That's when I saw it. An old vase sitting on a shelf in the corner, covered in dust and cobwebs. My heart pounded as I ran towards it, my hands trembling as I grabbed it. The label on the vase was faded, barely legible, but I could make out the name. Vivian Prince. It was her. The realization hit me like a wave. Her presence had lingered all these years because she wasn't fully gone. She never truly left. The ashes were more than just a remnant of a body. They were a prison of a malevolent force that had waited for this moment. I clutched the vase tightly and sprinted towards the stairs, the wind howling through the basement as if the spirit knew what I was about to do. The cold bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I couldn't stop. I had to finish this. Outside, the night air was frigid and sharp, the wind tearing through the trees as if the world itself was trying to stop me. I stumbled into the ground, the soft earth giving way beneath my feet as I dropped to my knees, frantically digging a hole with my bare hands. The wind howled louder, and I could hear the spirit's enraged voice screaming inside the house, but I didn't care. I had to bury her. I had to end this. "No, you don't. You're a babysitter. Get it out. Get out. Get out. Get out." With trembling hands, I placed the vase into the ground and began covering with dirt. The wind swirled around me and fiercely and wild, but as soon as the last bit of earth was in place, everything stopped. The wind died. The air grew still. A heavy silence fell over the yard, and for a moment, everything was eerily calm. Then, from inside the house, I heard a piercing scream, sharp and furious. It cut through the air, filled with anger and pain, but just as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The night was silent again, and I knew it was over. I ran back into the house, my heart racing. In the basement, Daniel lay on the floor, gasping for his breath, his body trembling. The shadows that had clung onto the walls had disappeared, and the oppressive weight that had filled the room was gone. I knelt beside him, pulling him into my arms, holding him close. "It's over," I whispered, my voice shaking. "She can't hurt you anymore." Daniel's small body shook as he clung to me, but I could feel the tension leave him, the fear that had gripped him finally losing its hold. The spirit of his aunt, the jealousy, the resentment that had consumed her in life and twisted her in death was gone, buried with her ashes. Okay, so I did not realize that story was that long. I need to it was really good though. Honestly, I felt like I was reading a thriller to myself. I forgot that I was recording for a moment. I didn't really, but I was really into the way that OP wrote, and they actually linked another page. It's called Her Screams. So I'm assuming that this was not a real story, but it was a great It was a great story. Exactly what that was. A story. Like some sort of this. I honestly thought it was like going to be a real story. I wasn't expecting it to be this novel, this thriller novel. But I really liked reading this. So thank you, OP, for being very creative and very well written. All in all, like, you're the babysitter. You do not have to do all that. Maybe take Daniel, like I said, to Burger King, and fingers crossed that Mrs. Winters comes back at any point. Maybe she wanted to leave you with the kid. So babysitting gig wasn't worth it. I kind of want OP to write a little thriller book for me. That sounds like the exact thing that I would read, honestly. I love a good thriller book. Okay, so this next story is titled, I took a job in a remote town and now I'm being followed. First of all, I'd like to say that I've never really been a believer in the supernatural. Sure, I enjoy spooky stories, especially around this time of year, and I've definitely gone down a few rabbit holes exploring weird phenomena. But I wouldn't really call myself a true believer. I've asked for advice on this topic before, not here, but on other forums, but nothing ever worked. So I figured that there's no harm in following some people's advice and sharing my story here, even though I'm not really sure what to expect from this. I just realized with this, I got chilly, so this is a very cozy jacket, but I realized that this is giving Christmas, whatever. Back in January, my university shared a job opportunity from a school in the north of Ireland, looking for a recent graduate to join them as a Spanish teacher in the fall. At the time, I was in my final year of English studies at a university in Spain and wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do after graduation. So I applied, not really expecting much to come out of it. To my surprise, less than 2 months later, I got a call for an interview, and soon after, I was officially offered the position. Congrats, OP. Well, semi-congrats, because with the title, we know that you go down some sort of rabbit hole. That led to a restless summer as I prepared for the life that I was about to start. I had some reservations, but my parents had even more. The town where I would be teaching was so small and remote that I didn't even show up on Google Street View, and the nearest hospital was almost an hour's drive away. It was one of those aging towns with very few children, and as such, the school didn't serve the local kids. It hosted children from nearby towns as well, with a total of about 10 to 15 students per grade, up to 6th grade. The local convenience store was stocked only once a week, so I was warned not to expect too much of a variety, and on top of all that, it was extremely cold. Despite all of this, I still felt drawn to go. The town was isolated, sure, but the photos I found online were breathtaking, and the small number of students would allow me to focus more on each of them. The limited options when it came to sustenance, I knew that was a word, but it doesn't look great. I guess I've never seen it. Whatever. There's a lot of learning words on this go around. Sustenance sounded harsh, but having a car was sure to help the situation at least a little bit. The salary was generous too, as remote teaching jobs in such areas were hard to fill, and the offer of free housing didn't hurt either. Knowing how isolated the town was, I decided to bring my car and take the time to drive through Spain, France, and Ireland. What should have been a 2-day journey turned into a week-long road trip. I took the scenic route, stopping at hotels and doing a lot of sightseeing on the way. I arrived at my new house late at night, after countless wrong turns and much cursing at Google Maps, hours after I was supposed to arrive. I thought I might have to spend the night in my car, but I was relieved to see a light on in the house inside. I knocked at the door and waited. After a couple of minutes with no response, I knocked again, and again after a couple minutes, and that's when I heard a voice behind me. Hello? I gasped and quickly whipped around, my heart pounding. The voice belonged to a man. He was tall, but not intimidatingly so, with neatly combed dark brown hair that looked oddly perfect in the midst of howling wind. He looked at me like I was some sort of intruder. "Can I help you?" he asked with his tone laced with annoyance. Still trying to calm down, I replied, "Hi, no, that's okay, thank you. I'm just waiting for someone to open the door." He gave me a look that made me feel like the stupidest person on earth. "There's no one in there," he said, matter-of-factly. "And nobody here takes well to intruders, so..." He stepped forward, grabbed my arm, and began to pull me towards my car. Wait! I yanked my arm free and crossed over my chest. "I am not an intruder, thank you very much. I'm Sandra, the new Spanish teacher, and I'll be living here for the foreseeable future." A smirk creeped on his face. Amusement flickered in his eyes before he burst out laughing. He tried to contain it when he noticed how annoyed I was becoming. "I'm sorry. Just give me a second, okay? You, the new teacher? You look 12. I shot him a glare. "Not that I need to explain myself to you, but I'm 22 and this is none of your business." He laughed, shaking his head. "Still a baby in my eyes," he said with an irritating grin. "Slightly older than 12, sure, but a baby." I rolled my eyes, growing more annoyed by the second, especially since he didn't look much older than me. And how old are you, you wise elder? 23, I said, sarcasm dripping from my words. He smirked. His smirk returned, but this time, something darker flicked across his face. It sent a shiver down my spine. Slightly older than that, he said, with his tone unsettling. His words did something to me, made my throat tighten, as I suddenly realized how alone I was with this stranger on a deserted street. I shook it off, refusing to let him get to me. Well, I'd say nice to meet you, and that I hope to see you around, but I'd rather eat glass than do that, I said, trying to regain my composure. So if you'll excuse me, I began walking past him towards the house. There's no one in there, he repeated, his tone suddenly more serious, sending another chill down my spine. I remember thinking I should have worn a thicker jacket. Everyone leaves a light on when they're out, so don't come home to something they didn't invite. Everyone knows that. I rolled my eyes again, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling growing in my gut. If everyone knows that, doesn't it seem a little counterintuitive? Thieves will just target houses with lights on. Besides, it's not like anybody's going to stumble upon this place by accident and rob a house. I could barely find my way here, and I want it to come. I wasn't talking about people. What? His voice trailed off ominously. Anyway, Carmen waited for you for hours, but she had to go home eventually. You'll have to make do until morning. I'd invite you to my house, you know, the neighborly thing to do. But since you'd rather, what was it? Eat glass? His smirk widened. I wouldn't want to put you in that predicament. So, enjoy your night in your car. And turn on the light. Cars are always free reign. I opened my mouth to respond, but the bark of a dog startled me. When I turned back to him, he was gone. Vanished, like he'd never been there at all. I sat in the car, huddled under my jacket, laying down in the back seat and contorting my legs so I could find a comfortable position, trying to stay warm as the wind howled around me. The man's words kept reappearing from time to time in my mind as I was trying to calm my racing thoughts, enough to get a little bit of sleep. I kept trying to tell myself that his words were just small-town nonsense and that absurd superstitions weren't worth risking running out the battery of my car. But I couldn't shake the creeping sense of dread that threatened to drown me. Damn you, whoever you are. And here I thought sleeping with a nightlight was behind me. I remember thinking, the barking dog had finally stopped, and now an unnerving silence settled over the street, broken only by the occasional gust of wind rattling in the windows. I flipped on the interior light, hoping it would make me feel less alone, but instead, it just cast a strange shadow inside the car, making everything feel more claustrophobic. Another longer story, but OP needs to write a thriller. We're doing longer stories apparently, and I'm loving this one. Loving it in a nice way. I'm assuming this is a fake story, but if it's a real story, I'm still not through with it, but I'm liking it. I would read it if it's a full thriller book. Out of nowhere, I heard the distinct sound of hooves. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a desperate attempt on the part of my brain to lull me to sleep through the exhaustion. But the rhythmic clatter grew louder, unmistakable against the cobblestones. Squinting through the fogged-up windshield, I saw it. A massive black horse standing at the edge of the road. Its eyes glowed in an unnatural amber, and its black hair shimmered in the darkness, as if it's absorbing the shadows around it. There was something wrong about it. Something too still, too perfect, like a statue. I tried to convince myself that that's what it was, but my heart started to race as the horse took slow, deliberate steps towards the car. Ugh. I wanted to move, to drive away, but I was paralyzed, locked in its gaze. The horse circled its car, its breathing coming out in thick, white, foggy clouds, fogging the windows even more. Its eyes never left mine, and with each step, the air in the car seemed to grow colder. I could feel it watching me, something far more intelligent and malicious than any other animal that I had seen before. Suddenly, it stopped right next to my window, towering over the car and lowering its head. Just as I thought it might smash through the glass, a loud crack echoed throughout the night. The horse flinched violently, eyes wide with fear. Its ears pinned back as it reared up, letting out a bone-chilling neigh that pierced through the wind. It bolted into the darkness, hooves pounding into the ground, disappearing as quietly as it appeared. Ah! My breath caught in my throat as I scanned the empty street, searching for the source of the noise. That's when I saw it. Just beyond the trees, a dark shape moving through the shadows. Too large to be human, too quick to be anything natural. I spent the rest of the night hugging my knees to my chest, flinching at every sound. every rustle of the wind. My mind raced with possibilities, but no explanation seemed to make sense. All I could do was just sit there, waiting for dawn to break. When morning finally came, so did Carmen, the woman whose house I was supposed to be staying in. She was short with graying hair, and she was wearing a long green robe that dragged along the ground as she hurried toward my car. She knocked gently on the window, her face filled with concern. Oh dear, she fretted as I opened the door. Are you all right? I'm so sorry for making you wait out here when you didn't show up last night. I figured you'd arrive sometime today. Poor thing. All alone out here all night in your car. I hope it wasn't too terrible. I forced a tired smile. It's all right, Miss Walsh. It was my fault. I got lost on the roads. She clicked her tongue. Who in their right minds decides to brave those roads at night? You're a very lucky girl, you know. Even the locals don't travel those paths after dark. Too many have gotten lost and never returned. She made a strange gesture with her hand. No one bothered you, I hope. Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Did she know? Had she heard about the horse or seen it herself? I couldn't tell if that's what she meant or if she was just voicing local superstition. Either way, I wasn't about to seem like the new crazy teacher who believed in ghost stories. No, I met somebody who told me you'd be back in the morning, so I just waited here. That's all, I said, following her to the house. She stopped abruptly at that, and I almost bumped into her. When she turned back to look at me, her face was serious. I think I know who you're talking about, she said, her voice slow. She took a deep breath before continuing. Child, if there's one thing you listen to me about, let it be this. Stay away from Cormac Burn. Promise me you will? I nodded, even though something told me it was a promise I would not be able to keep. Deep down, I had a feeling I'd be seeing him again. That was 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't be here if I had any other options, but I have nowhere else to go. I'm not a horse person, and I've tried to reach out on horse forums to see if anybody has any advice, but so far, nothing has helped. Because I've seen that horse again, every night since I moved here, it appears. At first, there was a distant glow, those same amber eyes shining in the darkness, far off in the distance. But with each passing night, it gets closer. I'm terrified of what will happen when it finally reaches my house. Oh, please, I need urgent advice. I don't think it'll be too long now. Okay, no offense to OP, but I feel like this is a made-up story, but even if it wasn't, then this is absolutely absurd. I was very interested in reading it, but the fact that it might be real, I don't know. I'm back and forth on if it's a true story. Either way, thank you for writing this, OP, because that was very interesting and very creepy because of the fact of who the hell is Cognac, or what's his name? Cormac, not Cognac. I'm pretty sure that's alcohol. Where did he come from? Why did he just disappear? What's going on in this town? What's going on in Ireland? I think that's where she was, right? Where they were. OP, you're leaving me in a stump, and I hope that you're okay if this is real, and I hope that you never see these creepy horses or Cognac again. Also, when OP was said being followed, I automatically assumed, like, stalker situation instead of, like, weird, creepy Cognac and creepy Carmen. Actually, the next story is pretty long, too. I did not look into these stories. Maybe I'll just cut it down, because all of these stories were pretty long. Alright, we're just gonna keep this episode to three stories because these were pretty long stories and I wasn't anticipating it, honestly, but I still want to put these out. So the last one we're going to end on is something walks whistling past my house every night at 3:03. Which, if you know, you know. Again, I think I said it in my last video, but those are the hours which all of the ghostly ghouls are roaming all about. Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts exactly at 3:03. Is it AM and PM? AM or PM? AM's very creepy, but I'm assuming you're not in your kitchen at 3:03 AM, so maybe it's 3:03 PM. In that case, it's creepy, but also, like, it's still daytime, so you can get a little less creepy. I don't know. Maybe they'll talk about it. The sound starts faint, somewhere near the beginning of the lane, near the Carson place. We're toward the middle of the street, so the whistling noise moves past us before fading into the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found out. But they were never too hard on us since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here ever since I was 6 and I love it. The houses are small but well kept, good sized yards, plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and we would always play Foursquare in the cul-de-sac or roam around the back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it, and there's only the two strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom, but Mom and Dad don't like to talk about it, so I've stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't so calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes moving faster, and he tells us not to think about it too much and to always remember the one rule, the big rule: don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look even if we wanted to. See, there are shutters from the inside over the window. Thick pieces of heavy canvas that pulls down from the top and latches at the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock about the size of what you find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her in the living room before at 3:03 when the sound starts. I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often, at least I haven't caught her that much, but once or twice a month. I think she sits out there on our big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. It's cheerful. Da 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 dum da ba dee da ba dum ba da dee da da dum. That's definitely not the beat that the whistler's whistling, but it reads it. Da 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 dum da 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 dum. Clearly, I'm not a music person. Remember how I said that there's two odd things about where I live? Well, beside our night whistler, everyone in our neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about that part much either. But good things just seem to happen to people around here. Usually it's small things: winning a radio contest, or getting an unexpected promotion at work, or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard. You know, the authentic kind. The weather's pretty good, and there's no crime, and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings, I've heard my mom say in the living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She's born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small. I remember so small compared to even other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into her house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but all we could tell is that they were really confused. But my parents knew. Even I knew. Nola getting better was just another one of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed here, even after we found out. For every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder when someone new moves in. They're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was our first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was, really exceptional, hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happens every morning at 3:03 and ends at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents about the whistling. It was quiet, but it would never harm or hurt us as long as we didn't look for what was making the noise. This part they stress, and I pushed my ear to the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck changed, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anybody that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about the car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths, and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them, even if they live. There's no light in them ever again. No presence. My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if it was one of those pranks that they play on the new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home. My dad calmed her down, told her that our new neighbors were sincere and that they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom, and he knew that there were strange things that walked among us. Some of those strange things were good and some were bad. After the committee left, Dad went to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latch, the lock, installed them on every window in the house after dinner. The first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shh motion, that patted the couch next to him. I sat and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. Da 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 be da de ba ba da be da boo da da boo dee da boo da. It came and it went just like our neighbor said. The whistling returns each night and we never look. We enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own and she's growing into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anybody want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them their macaroni casseroles, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell the look on my dad's face when he comes back. If the family took the committee seriously, or we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, a family moved directly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at 105. She lived a good, long life. Our new neighbors seemed like they fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee, took my dad's advice about locking shutters, and since they had young children of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in that manila folder, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been something awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issues on the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night. As soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell this was going to be a bad time. You know who's always out there whistling every night? Holden asked the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly in the television. My sister and I exchanged a glance. We don't talk about that, I said. I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house in the corner, Holden said. Mr. Tolles? My sister asked. No way. He's really nice. Holden shrugged. Must be a psycho killer then. Nola tensed. We don't talk about it, I repeated. Let's go in my room and play Nintendo. We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I can see Holden getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. Have you ever tried looking, he asked. It's nearly time. Like most sleepovers, we conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see that he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key, he continued, ignoring me. So does our dad, said Nola. No, replied Holden. No, he doesn't. You saw him do it, I said a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his normal keychain. So? I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next, because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew that we took it seriously. So, after your dad locked up before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom, and on my way, I may have peeked into the room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on the nightstand, and I maybe went and borrowed the keys to the blinds. Nola and I stared at his grin, which only grew wider. You're lying, I said. Holden shrugged. You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand. Stay here, I told both of them. Don't move a muscle. I hurried over to my parents' room but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it. But more scared of an open window with the whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly. From my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer. Unsure whether I should turn on the light, call out my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. "Nola!" I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to a window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on the blinds. I hear a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh. Nola stood beside him, hunched up, afraid, but probably curious. The whistling was right outside of our house now. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen. Clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blinds all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling on the other side of the window. But I had my arms around Nola, and I turned so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut. The blinds whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. "Don't look, okay?" I told her. "Don't turn around." We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed. I felt her nod in my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola and tried to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. "Holden?" I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for this time of year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the strings of the blind. The glass began to get warmer the further I reached, and there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light peeking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of motion. Lights sparked to life in the hall, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale. He had bit his lips so hard that there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. "What happened?" my dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night. In that moment, an ugly, old, terrifying stitch on his face. A parent's fear. "Just Holden?" he mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a breath. He looked so relieved. I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wonder if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered. "Don't answer it," my mom said. She stood at the threshold of the door. I'd always thought she was a skeptic, but just humored my dad about the windows and the whistler that night. But that night, we were all believers. I noticed that both my parents held baseball bats and that they might have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him, holding him close. "We won't," my dad promised, still holding his bat. "Nothing is coming in here tonight." Thud, thud, thud. This time, knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close. Thud, thud, thud. "Call the police," my mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. "Do you think?" He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite tap, tap, tap. "Police," something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside the door sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the word back to her. That goes back to like the mimic story that I think it was in another video. I filmed these back to back, so I don't remember what I put in this at this point. These stories are so long, but this one is so interesting, and I'm freaked out right now. "Police. Call the police. Tap, tap, tap. Police." My mom pulled us closer. "Police, police, police." "Please stop," I heard her whisper. "I don't think calling them will help," my dad said. "How will we know when they're the ones at the door?" The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned together towards the back door, but knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back, back to front, quiet then loud, loud again. Suddenly the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all the windows of the house. then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play at once. Or we were a turtle or something trying to attempt us to claw us out of our shell. Stop, Holden yelled. The knocking died. I won't tell, Holden said, staring at the door. I promise I won't tell anybody what I saw. Just please go away. We waited for nearly a minute, and then we heard it. A soft tap, 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 coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushing his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things were going to be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't even know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into the room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into the bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back to the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped around 7 a.m. Damn, the whisperer was like 4 hours past what they usually do. That's about the time the sun comes up here. We went another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from the one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom first. I heard him open the door, then come back in. Okay, he told us. It's done. Yeah, just for the day, though. Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house and all went quiet inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck by me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, she looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched some movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in a chair he pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of the week, but by Thursday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them pack the whole afternoon after school. What sticks to me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same paler, grim mouths and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everybody who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that have lived have the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked either to comfort him if they don't believe him or share the burden if they did. I watched Nola some days, happy, young, and alive, and I wondered if I'd been slower if she looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too? To comfort her? To share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walk every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave, but we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore, and my dad hides the keys to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for. Okay, so this is linked to, what's his name? Travis Brown writing. Clearly that was a very long story, and that was a pretty creepy story. And all these stories reminded me of just like those scary stories to tell in the dark, or like an urban legend. I loved those. The book fair, the Scholastic Book Fair, those are my first go-to. I loved going to the scary stories to tell in the dark, all those volumes or whatever. And this was kind of like a little glimpse back into that. So if you also felt that, let me know. Also, be sure to comment, what was your favorite story? Like I said, I was kind of like blindsided by how long these were, so that's why there's only 3. But I'm expecting this video to be a little bit longer because of that. So please let me know, what was your favorite creepy story from this week's video? Was it story number 1, story number 2, or story number 3? Be sure to comment below so that I know, and then we can chat while we're in there. With that being said, we're going to wrap up this week's video. I am so grateful that YouTube decided to sprinkle you into my algorithm and sprinkle me into your algorithm. And if you want to keep this going and building this little community that we got going on in here, be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, all of the YouTube things. So that way that YouTube still knows that you're enjoying the content that I'm creating. I know that you're enjoying the content that I'm creating, so I can continue creating content that I enjoy creating, that you enjoy watching, that YouTube will enjoy promoting. So by liking, comment, liking, comment, sharing, subscribing, you'll continue to push that so we can continue to grow this Gal Pal community. I am so grateful for you watching all the way through, whether you're a returning viewer, a new viewer, either way, let me know. Be sure to be in the comments. This one was fun. This one was a little bit extra creepy. So I hope you enjoyed it just like I did, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!